the old cell phone my sister tossed in the trash bag that afternoon looked like nothing, a cracked clamshell relic from 2009 with a sticky pink case and a screen so scratched you could barely read the time. I fished it out of the garbage 2 days later, charged it on a windowsill using a cable I had kept since nursing school, and the single voice memo I found buried in its recordings folder would eventually force her to stand in a courtroom and listen to a judge use the words Promissory, Estoppel, unjust enrichment, and egregious breach of fiduciary duty. As I sit here now in my own office with the hum of cryotanks behind me, I can watch her through a glass wall every Tuesday afternoon, scrubbing specimen containers in a bright pink smock that says fertile ground for lies, while each consent form that prints at my front desk automatically watermarks the fraud docket number in 8-point font right under the patient's signature line. My name is not important, but I spent the first 15 years of my adult life as a trauma nurse in a level 1 ER, the kind of place where you learn to read a patient's blood pressure the way a meteorologist reads a hurricane. I met Robert when he rolled in with a shattered ankle from a construction site fall. He was a quiet, methodical architect who drew floor plans with a mechanical pencil, and who, I later learned, could spot a crooked line at 40 feet. We married 2 years later, and I left the hospital to help manage his small firm. The detail that matters later is that my father had been a locksmith, the sort who could impression a key from a blank while holding a conversation, and by the time I was 12 I could rake a 5-pin tumbler faster than he could. He gave me a small leather case with a tension wrench, a hook pick, and a rake when I turned 15, and I still kept it in the bottom of my nightstand, the brass polished from decades of handling. Robert used to joke that I was the only wife he knew who carried a tension wrench in her purse next to the lip balm. When Robert died of a sudden aortic dissection at age 51, the world collapsed into a single point of pain. I was the one who caught the signs first, a tearing pain he described between his shoulder blades, and I knew with horrible clinical certainty what it meant before the paramedics even arrived. I held his hand in the ambulance and whispered to him while his blood pressure cratered, and I was the one who told the ER attending to skip the CT and go straight to the, or because the dissection was already rupturing into his pericardium. He died on the table 6 minutes later. I stood in the hallway in a borrowed paper gown and watched the chaplain walk toward me, and I felt my entire future detach, like a sheet of ice calving from a glacier. The life insurance payout arrived 3 weeks after the funeral in a check for $127,000, a sum that felt simultaneously enormous and insulting. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the numbers, already drowning in grief, when my younger sister Lydia swanned through the door in a cloud of designer perfume with her husband Greg trailing behind her like a public relations attaché. Lydia had always been the golden child, the one who could talk a banker into giving her a loan with a smile and a handshake, and for years I had been the steady older sister who picked up the pieces. She delivered a beautiful eulogy at the service, tears glinting in her eyes on cue, and now she was here to make me an offer that sounded like salvation. She wanted to open a boutique fertility clinic, a place that would combine cutting-edge reproductive endocrinology with spa-like serenity. She needed seed capital. In exchange, she promised to care for me as I aged, to provide a home and security, a family bond that would never dissolve. She sat across from me, held both my hands, and looked directly into my eyes. "You're my sister, you're my blood, I will never let you be alone." I was 43 years old, shell-shocked and lonely, and the idea of being folded into her future felt like the only lifeline left. We went to the bank together the next morning. I endorsed the insurance check over to her new business account, and within a month Advanced Conception Associates opened its doors in a converted medical plaza on the east side. For a while, I even worked there part-time, doing patient intake and filing insurance claims, grateful for a routine that numbed the edges of my loss. Lydia would breeze through the lobby in white coats that she had monogrammed with her initials, and Greg managed the financials from a back office with a frosted glass door. They bought a 5-bedroom house in a gated community, a leased Lexus, and a vacation timeshare in Barbados that Lydia mentioned in passing as if it were an afterthought. Then last April, 8 months after the grand opening, I showed up to find the locks changed, and a notice taped to the glass door stating that the property had been sold to a national fertility chain for $800,000. Lydia had vanished. My calls went to voicemail. A text bounced back with a single sentence. "We've moved on, you should too." I stood on the sidewalk with my hands shaking, the $127,000 gone, my safety net shredded, and the cold awareness that I had been nothing more than a donor who believed a bedtime story. The vultures circled within 24 hours. Lydia and Greg pulled up in the Lexus, Greg in a pale linen blazer despite the heat, and explained that they wanted to help me pack. They were all solicitousness, Greg's hand on my shoulder, Lydia's voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. They had already arranged for me to move into their guest bedroom, they said, because they couldn't bear the thought of me alone in my empty house. I saw the performance for what it was, control disguised as care, but I was too stunned to resist. They walked through the house like appraisers, pointing at furniture they would sell or donate, and Lydia began pulling items from shelves and drawers with the efficiency of someone clearing a storage unit. She took a shoebox of old photographs and dumped it into a black trash bag, then grabbed the flip phone from the top drawer of my nightstand, where I kept odd electronics. It had been hers originally, a backup from years ago that she had given me when my own phone broke, and I had never wiped it. She held it up between two fingers. That thing's been dead for a decade, just junk, toss it. She dropped it into the bag and the plastic tie closed. Something in me, some old nursing instinct to salvage what might still work, made me retrieve it later that night after they had gone to bed. I crept down to the garage where the garbage bins sat, pulled the bag open, and dug through coffee grounds and crumpled tissues until my fingers closed around the pink case. I wiped it clean, carried it up to the guest bedroom, and plugged it into the wall charger I had brought from my own kitchen. The screen flickered to life at 2 a.m. The menu was a fossil of early mobile software, but the orange recording app icon was unmistakable. There was only one file in the voice memo folder, dated 16 days after I handed over the check. I pressed play with the speaker pinched against my ear so no one would hear. Lydia's voice, bright and unguarded, filled the silence first. Then Greg's deeper laugh joined it. They were somewhere with an echo, maybe a tile-floored office. Lydia was saying, "I can't believe she actually fell for the care for you forever garbage. The woman is so pathetically needy she thinks family means something beyond a credit score." Greg chuckled. "When the buyout clears, we'll be in Barbados before she even realizes the clinic's gone. She can go rot in a state-run nursing home for all I care. Sucker." There was a pause, and then Greg's voice shifted, slightly more sober. "What about that promissory note Robert forced us to sign? The one that says we owe her lifetime care in exchange for the money. Is that going to be a problem?" Lydia laughed again, a sharp, dismissive sound. "It's just a piece of paper, I don't even know where you filed it. As long as she never finds it, it's worthless. And even if she does, good luck enforcing a handwritten note from a dead man. She'll never figure it out." Lydia's voice then dropped into a theatrical imitation of me. "Oh, I just want to be useful, I just want someone to care about me. It's honestly embarrassing." She handed over every dime like it was Monopoly money. Then the recording ended with the sound of a chair scraping tile. The phone slipped from my fingers onto the bedspread. My heart pounded with a fury so cold it felt like surgical steel. In that moment my grief became something else. That recording was a confession, and I now knew there was a promissory note somewhere in this house. I would make both of them exhibits. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a promise made to a grieving widow should be as binding as any contract, and that people who build fortunes on the backs of their own family deserve to wear the consequences literally on their chests. The next morning, Lydia and Greg sat me down at their granite breakfast island with a stack of papers already printed and a pen placed just so. The document was 3 pages of dense legal language that I forced myself to skim while my hands trembled on cue. It declared that I acknowledged the $127,000 as a fully executed gift with no further obligations, that I released any interest in Advanced Conception Associates or its proceeds, that I waived all future claims against them personally, and buried in the 4th paragraph was a line that granted Greg durable power of attorney over my remaining financial accounts. They were trying to gut everything I had left. Greg slid the pen toward me with the practiced smile of a man who assumed a signature was a foregone conclusion. I stared at the page, letting my hands shake, and used my nursing training to adopt the exact expression of someone fogged by shock. "I don't think I can process this right now," I whispered. "Everything is still so raw. Can we wait a few days?" Lydia's jaw tightened. Greg leaned forward. "It's really just a formality, sweetheart. The faster we get this done, the faster we can take care of you properly." I let my eyes unfocus. "Maybe tomorrow, I'm so tired." Lydia exchanged a look with Greg, a flicker of impatience, but she recovered with a sugary head tilt and a pat on my hand. "Of course, we'll take care of everything. You just rest." I nodded like a hollow doll and let them lead me to the guest room. That night I heard them arguing in the kitchen, Greg's voice tight with anxiety, something about a title contingency and a closing deadline. I pressed my ear to the vent and heard the phrase, "If she doesn't sign by Friday," before Lydia shushed him. For the next 3 weeks I performed frailty like a role. I shuffled through the house in slippers. I let my sentences trail off mid-thought. I allowed Lydia to believe she was managing a broken woman. Behind that fog I watched. I learned the rhythm of their days. Greg left for the office at 9 and returned at 6, but his cell phone buzzed relentlessly from his home office on the second floor. Through the vent grate in my room, I could hear him on calls with suppliers and financiers, his voice rising and falling in panicked arcs. He would hang up, curse, and return to his laptop. Lydia started taking her calls in the car, but she never muted the Bluetooth speaker fast enough, and from the kitchen window, I caught snippets of conversations with a real estate broker about a closing that was dragging on longer than expected, and an unexpected title contingency. Their credit card bills, which I glimpsed in the recycling bin after they had left a Target bag on top of the papers, showed purchases for a vacation villa deposit in Barbados and a $5,200 rug charged 2 weeks prior. They were bleeding money they did not yet have, and the growing desperation was a pressure I could feel in the floorboards. The household accident that gave me my first real opening came on a Tuesday evening during a dinner party they hosted for 4 of Greg's colleagues. One of the guests, a heavy-set man in a tight suit, bit into a piece of herb-crusted lamb and immediately began to choke. His face went magenta, his hands clawed at his throat, and Lydia stood frozen with a crystal water glass in her hand screaming, "What do we do?" while Greg fumbled with his phone trying to type into a search engine. I crossed the dining room in 4 strides, wrapped my arms around the man's diaphragm from behind, and delivered one sharp upward thrust. The piece of lamb shot out onto the tablecloth. He gasped in a ragged breath, and I lowered him into a chair while I calmly checked his pulse. The room fell silent. I looked at Lydia, whose mouth was open, and said nothing. The contrast was a spotlight. In the chaos that followed, with guests crowding around the choking man and Lydia trying to salvage the evening, I slipped away to the powder room and then darted into Greg's office. The filing cabinet in the corner was a heavy steel Hahn, the kind with a wafer lock on the top drawer. I knelt down, pulled a bobby pin from my hair and the small leather case I had taken from my nightstand, and extracted a tension wrench. The lock was a simple 5-pin cylinder, nothing I hadn't mastered by 14. I inserted the tension wrench, applied gentle rotational force, and raked the pins with the bobby pin until I felt the last shear line click. The top drawer slid open with a soft sigh. Inside were hanging folders filled with contracts, tax returns, and buried at the back a single manila envelope with my name handwritten in Robert's meticulous architect's lettering. My heart lurched. I did not have time to read it, so I used my phone to photograph the outside, and the first page I could see, a document that began "Promissory note." Then I carefully closed the drawer, relocked it by reversing the tension, and returned to the dinner party as if I had been in the restroom. No one noticed. That night, after the guests left and the house settled, I returned to the office at 3 in the morning. I unlocked the cabinet again and pulled out the envelope. Inside was a promissory note, notarized and dated 2 days before I had endorsed the insurance check. It stated that in consideration of the sum of $127,000, Lydia and Greg Bennington jointly and severally promised to provide lifetime housing, daily assistance, and comprehensive care for me, and that upon any material default, the entire principal would become immediately due with 10% annual simple interest. Attached was a uniform commercial code financing statement, stamped and recorded at the county recorder's office, listing the clinic's assets as collateral. Beneath both documents was a 1-page letter from Robert addressed to me, written in the same steady hand. "My love," it began, "I know you trust your sister. I also know that trust is a bridge some people burn before they've finished crossing. I insisted they sign this. I also filed this UCC lien to secure the obligation. No one can sell the clinic without your release signature. Keep this safe. I will always protect you, even when I'm not there." I sat back on my heels with tears blurring the ink. The man had built a dead man's switch into a promise I had not even understood. I folded everything into the waistband of my pajamas and carried it back to my room. The following week, I took a bus to the county administration building and requested a copy of the official UCC filing from the records clerk. The woman behind the counter pulled it up on a terminal, printed it, and stamped it with a certified seal. I held the document in my hands and read the filing number, the legal description of the clinic property, and the names of the debtors listed in bold, Lydia and Greg Bennington. It was public, permanent, and still active. I now understood why the sale was frozen. The buyer's title company had discovered the lien during its search, and the entire $800,000 deal was contingent on a release that only I could sign. The panicked phone calls, the desperation, the forgery attempt that I would later find, all of it traced back to this single sheet of paper that Robert had filed in secret. The next series of discoveries came from the trash can beside Greg's desk, shredded papers that I patiently reassembled on my bedroom floor at 3 a.m. using Scotch tape, and a headlamp I had brought from my old camping gear. I would empty the wastebaskets each evening when Lydia asked me to take out the recycling, diverting the office trash to a plastic grocery bag under my bed. Then, while they slept, I would spread the strips across the carpet and piece them together like a forensic puzzle. It took 4 nights to reconstruct the first critical document, a draft of a lien release form with a signature block where my name had been typed. The signature itself was a clumsy forgery, my own name looped in a hand that did not match my nursing school cursive. Attached was a letter from the buyer's title company asking for a notarized original and threatening to pull the $800,000 deal if the requirement was not satisfied within 5 business days. The letter was dated 8 days ago. The deadline was already overdue. I also found a series of emails printed and then shredded, correspondence between Greg and a loan officer at a private equity firm, discussing a bridge loan to cover their expenses until the sale closed. The interest rate was predatory, and the collateral was their own house. They were drowning. The ally I needed appeared the following Monday, when I called a bank compliance officer named Marjorie HSU. I had looked up the title insurance company listed on the shredded documents and traced the file to her desk. I introduced myself using only my first name and explained that I was the obligee on a recorded UCC filing that appeared to be the subject of a fraudulent release. Marjorie's tone shifted from professional warmth to the clipped precision of someone who smells fraud. She asked me several specific questions about the filing number, the debtor names, and the signature in question, and then she paused for a long moment. "Ma'am," she said finally, "the release we received has already been flagged by our internal audit system for signature inconsistency. We were about to contact you ourselves through the address on file. If you're telling me you never signed this, we have a serious problem." She lowered her voice. "I can't promise you anything over the phone, but if you can come to our office with the original documents, we can initiate a formal suspicious activity report and involve the authorities. I'll need the promissory note, the voice recording you mentioned, and any evidence you have of their intent to defraud." I agreed to meet her, but I told her I needed one more critical piece of evidence first. The forged release had been emailed to the title company, and the original email was still on Greg's laptop. I had seen him leave it unlocked on his desk numerous times when he stepped away for coffee. I needed to capture that email with its full metadata headers, which would prove the transmission originated from his machine and his IP address. Marjorie told me exactly what to look for. "Forward it to yourself," she said, "and then delete the forward from his sent folder. It's not perfect chain of custody, but it's enough for a warrant if we pair it with your other documents." I began planning the laptop operation for the next night. The maximum cruelty beat came 2 days before I planned to visit Marjorie. I decided to test the depth of their indifference with a staged medical collapse. I had practiced the fall in front of the bathroom mirror, making sure my body would crumple naturally without striking my head, and that my breathing would appear shallow and irregular. Around noon on a Thursday, when Lydia was scrolling through social media in the living room and Greg was on a video call upstairs, I positioned myself on a bar stool in the kitchen and let myself slide off. I landed on the travertine floor with a clumsy thump, my eyes half-lidded, one arm flung out. I heard Lydia's voice first. She sighed, the kind of exhale you make when a grocery bag breaks mid-step. "Seriously? Greg, she's fainted again." Greg's muffled reply came from the staircase. "Not now, I'm on with the lender." Instead of checking my airway or calling 911, the 2 things any first aider learns in grade school, Lydia stepped over my prone body to grab a printout that was sitting on the end table next to my head. Her heel brushed my hair as she walked away. I lay there counting seconds until I heard her ask Greg in a lowered voice, "If she stays out too long and something happens, we could just say it was a stroke, right? It would solve the lien problem. Her estate would pass to us as next of kin, and then we could sign the release ourselves." Greg's voice was cold and distant. "Just wait. If she's not breathing in 10 minutes, we'll call. But I'm not losing this deal because of a fainting spell." I waited another 2 minutes, then stirred with a practiced groan of confusion. Greg didn't even pause his call. The final filament of family loyalty inside me snapped cleanly and replaced itself with something absolute. They were not just indifferent, they were calculating. If I had actually been dying, they would have let me die to protect their payout. Late that night after they had gone to bed, I slipped back into Greg's office. His laptop screen was dark but not locked, and the email client was open to the thread with the title company. I scrolled through the sent items and found the message from 3 weeks earlier with the subject line, "Signed lien release attached." The attachment was a scanned PDF of the forged signature, and the email body was a single sentence, "Please process immediately, closing deadline approaching." I opened the email properties and saw the metadata Marjorie had asked for, the originating IP, the timestamp, the user account name that was unmistakably Greg's work profile. I forwarded the entire chain, including the attachment and the full headers, to an encrypted personal email account I had set up from a library computer the week before using a prepaid gift card for the VPN service. Then I deleted the forward from Greg's sent folder, cleared the trash, and locked the screen exactly as I had found it. The digital breadcrumb was now outside their control, sitting in a server farm with the subject line, FW, signed lien release attached, and a time stamp that would hold up in any courtroom. The confrontation was choreographed by circumstance. 2 days later, the buyer's final extended deadline loomed, and the pressure had turned Lydia and Greg into coiled springs. They came into my room at 8 in the morning with coffee and a forced cheer that did not reach their eyes. Lydia said we were going to the bank, just a quick trip to handle some routine paperwork that would help them finalize the clinic's transition. She framed it as a simple signature to release an old administrative hold, nothing to worry about. Greg loomed behind her with his phone, already dialing the bank manager, a man named Crowley who I had heard them mention in strained, clipped tones. I agreed. I dressed deliberately in a navy blazer and low heels instead of my usual disguise of sweatpants, and I folded the original promissory note into the inside pocket of the blazer. The old pink phone, now fully charged and with the voice memo queued, went into the other pocket. I climbed into the back seat of their Lexus, and the drive to the commercial branch took 12 minutes. In the car, Lydia twisted around in her seat and gave me a smile that looked like it had been stapled on. "This is going to be so quick, sweetheart. Just a signature on a routine form and then we can go get lunch. I know a place with amazing quiche." I met her eyes. "Okay," I said softly. Greg's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. When we arrived, the bank manager, a thin, nervous man in a waistcoat, ushered us into a private office with a polished table and a stack of documents already laid out. The release was on top, a UCC-3 termination statement with the same filing number I had memorized. I saw the forgery square in the signature block, my name written in that wrong, loopy hand. Gregory produced a pen from his breast pocket and clicked it open. Lydia slid the paper toward me. Her smile was still stapled on, but sweat was beading along her hairline. "Just sign right there, sweetheart. This lets us take care of everything." I looked at the form, then at her and set the pen back down on the table. "No," I said. The word was quiet, the same tone I had once used to calm a panicking patient. "I will not release a lien that secures a promise you never intended to keep." Greg's face blanched. Lydia's composure cracked into a snarl. "You selfish little, after everything we've done for you, you'd destroy this for some sentimental nonsense." I did not raise my voice. I reached into my blazer and pulled out the phone. "I heard the voice memo, Lydia, the one where you called me a sucker and laughed about leaving me to rot. I have the promissory note Robert made you sign, the one you thought you could just ignore. I have the forged release you emailed to the title company, with the IP address and timestamp intact, and I have a bank compliance officer who has already filed a SAR. I pressed play on the phone, and Lydia's own mocking voice filled the private office, bright and cruel in the silence. The door opened before Lydia could respond. Marjorie HSU walked in, flanked by 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies and a plainclothes fraud investigator from the county prosecutor's office. She held up a tablet showing the SAR filing number and the authenticated email I had forwarded. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennington," she said, "you're being detained pending formal charges of forgery, felony fraud, and attempted grand theft by deception. Please step away from the table." Greg lunged for the release form, but one of the deputies intercepted him, and Lydia began backing toward the wall with her mouth opening and closing like a fish. I stood up, picked up my purse, and walked out of the office while the deputies read them their rights. Greg's Lexus keys were still on the table, so I asked the bank manager for a taxi instead. What followed was a cascade of legal consequences that I watched unfold through a series of meetings with the prosecutor's office. The sale to the national chain collapsed immediately when the buyer exercised the escape clause related to undisclosed encumbrances. The clinic's assets reverted to an escrow account controlled by a court-appointed receiver. The promissory note I held became the basis for a civil suit that incorporated my promissory estoppel claim, because my reliance on Lydia's spoken promise was demonstrable, detrimental, and well documented in the voice recording and the note itself. Greg attempted to argue that the note was coerced, but Robert's notarized execution and the testimony of the paralegal who witnessed it undercut that defense in half a day. The forged signature triggered felony charges that neither of them could plea bargain away easily, because the interstate nexus came into play when the fraudulent document was emailed to an out-of-state title company. Lydia cried on the stand and tried to blame Greg entirely, but the voice memo, now authenticated by a digital forensics lab that recovered its original extension from the phone's flash memory, made clear that she was the architect of the mockery. The promissory estoppel judgment came through 6 months later, a civil ruling that ordered full restitution plus damages. The judge, during the sentencing phase for the criminal counts, used the exact words that the news outlets would quote. "This is a case of egregious breach of fiduciary duty and moral turpitude." The restitution order was the part that I shaped with a precision that Robert would have admired. Instead of seeking maximum jail time, which would have left me with a permanent drain of legal fees and no practical recovery, I sat down with the prosecutor and a victim's advocate and proposed a structured settlement through a civil compromise. The court ordered the receivership to sell the clinic's equipment, furnishings, and patient list. The auction brought in $280,000. That, combined with the lien enforcement and accrued interest on the promissory note, satisfied the debt and then some. I used the proceeds, plus a small business loan backed by the county's Victim Recovery Fund that specifically supports individuals defrauded by family members, to purchase the remaining clinic assets at a trustee's auction. I reopened it 4 months later under a new name, Cycle of Deceit Egg Freezing. The name is not ironic, it is a memorial to the truth that let me rebuild. Lydia's sentence, as part of her community service, and a permanent injunction barring her from ownership in any medical business, requires her to work 30 hours a week at my clinic performing biohazard sanitation duties under direct supervision. On the first day, a probation officer escorted her in, and I handed her a pink scrub smock with an embroidered sublogo on the back, "Fertile Ground for Lies" in looping white script. She read it and her face went the color of old paper. She cleans specimen collection containers, mops the embryology lab floors, and autoclaves equipment while wearing that smock, and federal probation monitors verify her hours each month. Every patient consent form, generated from our electronic medical records system, includes a mandatory legal disclosure statement at the bottom. I hired a medical software developer to embed a custom field that pulls the original creditor name, the UCC filing number, and the felony docket reference from a database, and prints it in 8-point font right under the patient's signature line. Patients sometimes ask about it, and I tell them simply that it's a reminder that every promise carries a lien against the soul that breaks it. My sister has to look at her own docket number every time she hands a clipboard to a hopeful mother-to-be. Robert's foresight was not magic. It was the diligence of a quiet man who understood that family has no legal meaning without enforceable boundaries. He protected me from beyond the grave, and I will spend the rest of my life running a clinic where the word deceit is literally woven into the fabric of the uniform worn by the person who tried to erase me. The consent forms print the docket number every time, a small black string of digits that spells out exactly what a promissory estoppel judgment looks like in practice. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, hit like and subscribe for more tales of clever schemers who get exactly what they deserve. See you in the next one.